G'day everyone, lesson 6. Woo. So this lesson is looking at consolidating a particular component of research that we looked at in the last lesson. And it's going to be looking at content analysis. So the reason we're specifically doing this one is because thy syllabus stipulates we need to do it. So here it is: examine at least 2 contemporary issues using one of the following. So we're going to do a content analysis. We're going to actually look at 3 issues because we're all overachievers in SAC. Woo! Alright, first up, some of this is going to be done in class for this lesson, but I'll let you know what those bits are, so stay tuned. So contemporary analysis, contemporary issues using a content analysis. Bit of a tongue twister there. So quick recap on content analysis. We know it's both a qualitative and quantitative research method, remembering that you're highlighting with me and annotating as we go. Quantitative, we're detecting and counting, and that way it can be quantified. Okay, so there's a few different ways we can do it. And then that qualitatively, we are looking at analyzing and interpreting themes, words, images, blah, 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 blah from the media. Okay, so we're interpreting things. After we do that, we then make a qualitative judgment about the meaning of it. Okay? So in a nutshell, that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be looking at 3 different bits of media from the media, I guess. And we're going to be looking at it under a microscope. And I guess that's that image that I've got here. I want you to think of content analysis like you're looking under the microscope. You're analyzing it in extreme detail, and you're looking not just for the overt things. Remember overt, what does overt mean? Think, maybe pause, ask a friend. Overt means something that's obvious, okay? It's something that's obvious that you can see. So something like a news article, the heading or title's really overt, it's really obvious, but the language and the messages that they're trying to convey within their text might be more covert, meaning they're a bit undercover or a bit hidden. So we want to be looking at both of those things, but particularly the covert things, the microscope thing, because that's where the juicy parts are. The devil is in the detail, as they say. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is an article from a few years ago, looking at deadly Mexican cartel threats. Alright, so we're just going to discuss this one as a bit of a guide or a model to content analysis, and then you guys are going to go off and sort of do your own later. So what this is a research article. Okay, so remembering our definition of a content analysis, if we go here, qualitatively we can interpret words, images, documents, or media. Okay, so we're going to analyze the themes, and then we might even do a bit of quantitative research, detecting and counting some bits of language that's used. So the title of this article is An Increasing Threat: Deadly Mexican Cartels Moving on Australia. Okay, immediately to me, I guess what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just think out loud a little bit, which will hopefully kind of model the sort of content analysis I'm thinking. So I'm probably going to move more towards the qualitative aspect of content analysis as I start, and then we might do some quantitative stuff towards the end here. But qualitatively, what I can see from the article is that it's trying to invoke, I think, a particularly emotive response, I think, in the reader. The idea or the emotion, I think, is sort of fear. That's the word that jumps out to me. I'm being told that there's an increasing threat on the horizon in Australia, and the word deadly here, deadly, that's a pretty strong word, that's strong use of language, and to me that's trying to invoke fear. And I think that the fact too that it's not just a deadly cartel, it's a deadly Mexican cartel, right? So whether or not that fear is trying to be stipulated towards a particular cultural group or not remains to be seen. So that's something I'm just noticing about the theme of the article. It seems to be a little fear-based. So the first statement we have is the following. When Demetrius Jimmy Guantanus and his mate, right, Liu Yan Leichung, allegedly tried to import 101 kilograms of ice, bit of a typo there, it's awkward, for the Sydney Morning Herald, and cocaine to Australia from Mexico in late 2017. It was just the start. So I guess the language that I'm picking up here is, I think, building upon that concept of the increasing threat of a Mexican gang by importing 101 kilos, not 100, 101, and the idea that it's just the start kind of aligns with that concept of an increasing threat as it continues to move on. I also think the trying to normalize the names of the criminals in terms of this is not a very Western name, nor is this. However, they've tried to colloquialise it into Australian slang. Jimmy and his mate, I think, is trying to play on that idea of the foreign other aren't like us sort of thing. Again, there are some words here that I can see. Fearsome, again, driving on that concept of fear. We'll come to this image in a second. Again, the quote here, really looking forward to completion of this one and on to bigger and better ones, Mr. Guantanus allegedly told someone. So again, it's really reflecting that key theme of an increasing threat here that we can see in the language. What I'm seeing here in this image, though, is a little bit different, right? I've got a guy sitting down, head's in his hands, he's cuffed. If we were to analyze this image, and I think it's what it's kind of trying to convey to the reader, is that this person is a criminal, I think, and the thing that they're doing is wrong because we can see the handcuffs there. I think the idea that they're caught also symbolizes, I guess, the severity of the crime that they've done. If we look at sort of the head in the hands sort of notion, I guess this kind of like threat that if you're going to engage in this particular activity, you're going to get caught and you're going to feel shameful and remorseful about it. So again, these are just my qualitative interpretations. Whether they're correct or not is subject to debate. So that's kind of a qualitative lens of it. What I'll do now, and I haven't even read the whole article, what I'll do is I'm going to do a quick quantitative analysis of words that I think align with that concept of fear that I think the author here is trying to portray regarding the deadly Mexican cartels. So I've got 1 here, 2 here, so we'll keep a tally. 3 with fearsome. 4 we've got dangerous criminals. 5 deadliest place on earth. And even 6 civilians caught in the crossfire. Pumping drugs, bribing, laundering money, commanding assassins, brutal acts of violence. I think I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the count of 5 or 6. I think I'm losing. We'll just say it's 10. I've lost count. Australia's a clear target, so 11. Record-breaking importations. Outlaw motorcycle gang will meet with Mexicans and Chinese people. They're cross-pollinating. You know, this idea of racially motivated violence. You know, white people can't commit crime, obviously. So we've got, I think we're up to 13, 14. 15, emerging threat. 16, growing threat. Fighting to stop drugs, you know. So there's like 15, 16, I think, quantitative sort of instances where the language being used in this article is seeking, I think, to increase fear of others, and particularly it does appear Mexican, and I think there's a bit of Chinese with Leo, Mr. Chung and other people. So I think that there's really this kind of like fear-driven based of the other. So I guess that's sort of a very brief analysis of sort of how you can do it. Another really common one is to look at a magazine article and sort of depict how do the images match the kind of words on the screen. That's another good one to do. Social media accounts are a really good one to do. You know, if you look at an Instagram post from Kim Kardashian or something, and she's like, I don't know, save the planet, and it's a photo of her butt. Like, you know, I guess qualitatively, what are we trying to say there? I'm not sure, that was just a hypothetical example. But those sorts of things, and I guess thought patterns is sort of what you're looking for when you're doing it. So we're going to do two others. So this one's kind of related to that sort of fear of the other Mexican kind of threat. So this is referring to the time that Donald Trump, just as he became president of the United States, stated that he was going to build a wall between America and Mexico to keep out the Mexicans and their drugs. So we're going to analyze, I guess, this artist's interpretation of Donald Trump's announcement that he was going to be doing that, and I want you to apply it to this method. Now, you'll probably notice that this one's very much qualitative in nature. I think I want to focus more on the qualitative aspect, because I think a quantitative content analysis is fairly easy to do, as you just saw me do there. I'm just really counting and tallying and quantifying things, and usually that quantified data is used to strengthen the argument of your qualitative interpretations. So the fact that I was qualitatively saying that this article is very much fear-based around different ethnicities and crime was backed up by the 16 or so instances where the authors use that sort of language to describe them, whilst noting the severe absence of talking to and about white criminals who do drugs and sell drugs. I noticed that the absence of that in the article was quite interesting. So what you'll notice with this is I've given you, I guess, kind of a prompt. So what I've noticed for this is that the clothing appears to be too big on Donald Trump, which might suggest that his views are childish, because children often wear baggy hand-me-downs, but it might also suggest that the role of president doesn't fit him, is sort of an idea that I've got there. This may feel a bit like an English lesson, but it's SAC, so don't stress. There's heaps of other things that I think you can pick up on. If you look at the war itself, what are the bricks being built out of? Where are the bricks coming out of? There's lots of different things you can unpack there. I'm curious to see if you'll spot them all. But that's one contemporary issue. So I want you to just sort of dot point an idea. So you might dot point wall and then write, I guess, your interpretation of the image of that wall. The second one is looking at this image here, which is looking at the political issue or contemporary issue of climate change, and particularly those who deny the science of climate change. So again, this will be qualitative in nature, and I want you to sort of guess what the artist is trying to convey here. I've given you again another prompt that I think the fact that dinosaurs are holding the sign is one thing in of itself, which you might want to comment on, but the dinosaur particularly that's holding the sign has a beer gut, he looks quite old, and this might allude to the kind of demographic that may deny the science of climate change. I can also notice that the dinosaur isn't actually looking at the problem, he's kind of looking up and away at it, and sort of standing by and doing nothing as well. So interesting to note that. You might pick up on some other things, who knows. But again, I want you to dot point that, and then we'll review those in class together. The summary task I want you to do for this lesson is I want you to then find a bit of media of your choice. It can be a newspaper, another political cartoon, it could be an Instagram photo or screenshot, it could be a TV show, a movie, whatever it is. You choose the piece of content, and I want you to apply the method of content analysis to it, to interpret it and try and reveal its meaning. Remember, I want you to try and get qualitative and quantitative aspects in your own. So let's say you do an Instagram photo, you might note the amount of shares, likes, comments and stuff that it gets in sort of numeric values, and then sort of interpret what the caption and the photo is trying to convey there. So what I'd like you to do is print out whatever bit of media it is, glue it in here, sort of like this, and then on the second half of the page I want you to to annotate it and analyze the content. I think just the last thing on this, I think try to pick something kind of controversial. Try to pick something that's contemporary, that's kind of happening now-ish. Like we've just some common debates that are sort of prevalent in the media at the moment. You know, at the time that I'm filming this, Australia Day is tomorrow, the day that I'm filming this. So that's a controversial issue that comes up each year in terms of the change the date sort of debate. So you might find a newspaper clipping, or you might have noticed that recently, you know, Kmart said they weren't going to sell any Australian Day merchandise and all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of different things you can look at. But at the end of the day, it's your choice. But try to pick something a little bit controversial, because, you know, juicy stuff's good stuff. What I want you to do after that is I have compiled, I believe, 20 multiple choice questions, and they're all about research methods. So this is a research method revision for you. I'm going to quickly, I guess, think out loud again and model how you should answer a multiple choice question. And then I want you guys to do the rest of them. Once you've done them, I then want you to compare it with a peer's response in class and just check how you guys went in comparison to each other. You know, if you got anything different, maybe discuss why not, that sort of thing. And then we'll come back to class and we'll do a little statistical analysis, you know, without naming and shaming, like don't stress, it's a safe environment. And just statistically see where our major strengths and if there's any areas of improvement required. So I'll do the first couple, and then so you can sort of think out loud and see the process. So whenever you answer a multiple choice question, it's really important that you do a few key things. Alright, so the first and most obvious thing to do is read the question very carefully. Okay, this way you're actually going to know what they're asking, and then you can sort of look and hunt for the correct answer. So this question is looking at, in which method does a researcher interpret words and images to understand social life? I wonder what we were just doing. But anyway, so the second step you want to kind of do is eliminate what it can't be, because when you the idea why you want to do that sort of first is if you're reading 4 options and you're not sure which out of the 4 it is, it's a lot more cognitive load that you're carrying in trying to answer that question. If you can 100% eliminate something that it cannot be, it reduces that cognitive load, and then you might only be tossing up between 1 or 2 options, or I reckon about 80% of the time, 90% of the time, it'll eliminate 3 options for you straight away, and then it'll really highlight and indicate you what the most correct answer is. So I'm going to do that right now. So I'm going to rule out what it can't be. Okay. So I know that in an interview is a one-on-one, open-ended conversation with someone, and I'm not really interpreting any images in an interview, so I know that that definitely can't be the case. So I'm gonna rule that one out. Observation. I know an observation, if I go back to the syllabus definition, is looking at counting and tallying things. Okay, but the key word here where it says interpreting suggests to me that this is a qualitative research method, and I know that observation is a quantitative research method. And if I'm interpreting something, I'm not counting and tallying it, so it can't be B. It's not an observation. The next one down I read is a content analysis. Now, what do I know about content analysis? I know it's qualitative and quantitative in nature, depending on it. If I read the definition, it does seem that this aligns with the qualitative aspect of content analysis, which is interpreting themes, words, documents, images, and making subjective qualitative judgments about the meaning behind it. So I've got that here. I'm interpreting words and images to understand something. Okay, so the answer could be content analysis. So I'm going to leave that option there. Okay. Next step is I'm going to look at D, which is a statistical analysis. Okay, so I know a statistical analysis based on my syllabus understanding is when we examine statistics and we extrapolate that data to identify a trend, right? There are no statistics proposed or any implication of statistics or quantitative data in here. I'm interpreting words and images, not numbers, and so I know that it can't be a statistical analysis. So by ruling out all the incorrect answers, I'm left with just one, which I believe is a content analysis, and this leads me to my third point. You want to double check it's a right answer, and to do that you have to ensure that the right answer reaches all the conditions of the question, that it's 100% correct, because sometimes you will have a multiple choice question where it might list 3 different characteristics of something and 2 out of 3 might be right. Okay, so it's really close but it's not quite there. Unless all 3 of these meet the characteristics, then it can't be true. Okay, so it has to meet everything. Now I know a content analysis qualitatively, you do interpret words and you do interpret images to understand things, so I definitely know that that is the right answer. Alright, so I guess that's kind of me modeling, I guess, a little bit of an easier question, I'd say. I'm going to do question 5 here because there's multiple things it's asking me to consider, and there's also multiple answers which we've got to look at. Okay, so question 5 is, first I got to read the question, right? Ensuring participant confidentiality and acknowledging special needs of vulnerable groups are both ethical considerations most relevant to which of the following? And I'm noticing that I've got 2 options for each. Alright, so going back to my previous point I made, the right answer has to meet the conditions entirely of the question. So it must ensure participant confidentiality, and it must acknowledge special needs of vulnerable groups, and it must be an ethical consideration. Okay, so there's 3 kind of key components there, and it has to meet not just one of these, but both the research methods. And this one as well is saying most relevant. So you might have a few that are kind of on the cusp, but you got to make that judgment call. So we'll start from the bottom up this time, just to mix it up. So statistical analysis and participant observation. Do I need to ensure participant confidentiality and acknowledge special needs of vulnerable groups to both of these research methods? Now, I don't technically acknowledge the needs of vulnerable groups or the special needs of vulnerable groups when I'm doing a statistical analysis. I don't have any participants in that. When I'm doing a statistical analysis, I'm looking at different data trends and I'm extrapolating them into a graph or something. So therefore, straight away I know that the answer can't be D based on that reason, because I remember it has to meet the conditions of everything. It's definitely true for participant observation on both accounts here, but it's not true for statistical analysis, so I've got to get rid of that. The second last one, C, questionnaire and content analysis. So do I need to ensure participant confidentiality and acknowledge needs of special groups here? I 100% need participant confidentiality with both of these. So whether it's, or depending on the nature even of a content analysis, not necessarily. With a questionnaire, yes, I need participant confidentiality, and yes, I've got to acknowledge special needs of vulnerable groups. So let's say I'm not going to give someone who can't read a questionnaire, I might read it out loud to them and record their responses, so things like that can happen. But in terms of a content analysis, typically your participants' confidentiality isn't in the questionnaire, because in a content analysis you're examining a piece of media that's typically already public, or a film or document or something, so it negates that need too. And then as well, acknowledging special needs of vulnerable groups within that content analysis doesn't really fit in that research method, so I know that the answer is not C. If I go one up from that, I've got interview and secondary research. So an interview, I certainly need to have participant confidentiality and acknowledge their special needs. That's an ethical consideration. But for secondary research, I'm making qualitative judgments about other people's research. So they've already done the research. So I technically don't have any participants of that research. In fact, I have to acknowledge and cite my secondary research. So the question of confidentiality can't really happen with secondary research. So I know that the answer there is wrong, which only leaves me with one option, right? Which I'm going to assume is probably the correct answer, but we double check anyway. Remember, we make sure that the right answer meets the right conditions in both accounts. So, a focus group. Very similar to an interview, I need to have participant confidentiality, yes, and acknowledge special needs of any groups that are in there, or vulnerable groups. Likewise, when I'm doing an observation, I need to ensure participant confidentiality. You know, I'm not going to, if I use the example of people putting their rubbish in the bin, I'm not going to oust the social group and name and shame them all in my report after completing an observation on it. Now, this is where we come to the most relevant to each of the following. Acknowledging special needs of vulnerable groups isn't typically something that you consider strongly with an observation. However, when we base it off the fact that B, C, and D are 100% incorrect, it is the most relevant to both of these bits of research. So therefore, that is the right answer. So we highlight A is our right answer and keep going. Okay, so that's just thinking out loud. I want you guys to do the same with the rest of it. We're going to mark them in class, so save your mark out at 20 later, for later when we review that in class. But yeah, happy days. Thank you.